Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The sound of the bullet's sharp crack echoed through the shooting range, reverberating off the walls like a thunderclap in the still morning air. Her fingers tightened on the rifle, a cold, unfamiliar weight that felt both foreign and strangely comforting. Her heart thudded, her breath shallow as she stared down the barrel, the target at the far end of the range looking like a distant, unreachable dream. It was just her and the shooting range, no distractions, no voices, just the sheer intensity of the moment. The crowd had fallen silent, the faint hum of the range's ventilation system barely noticeable against the noise in her head. She had blocked out everything. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. The whispers started. Soft at first. Then louder. She's a beginner. She doesn't belong here. Her grip tightened on the rifle again, the sound of their voices like a dagger aimed at her self-confidence. But she didn't flinch. She had heard it all before. The doubts, the mocking, the dismissive comments. It was nothing new. The kind of thing she had learned to endure all her life. The other shooters around her, men, all seasoned professionals, exchanged knowing looks. They were skeptical at best. Amused at worst. She didn't belong here. Not among them. Not in their world. A woman, inexperienced, unsure, she was out of place. She'll never make it past the first shot, one of them muttered to his companion. The words floated in the air, a mockery wrapped in the guise of casual conversation. A few chuckled. The air thickened with a tension that felt all too familiar. But she remained calm. She couldn't afford not to be. A man in his mid-40s, well-dressed in an expensive suit, leaned in, whispering to the guy standing next to him. "Bet you $5,000 she misses her target," he said, his voice loud enough for her to hear, but not in a way that would make it seem intentional. She couldn't help but glance at him. His polished shoes, expensive watch, the air of entitlement that seemed to radiate from his every word. He was one of the billionaires who frequented these kinds of private shooting ranges. To him, a woman like her was nothing but a distraction, an anomaly. She didn't let it bother her, though. In fact, she found a strange sense of determination building within her. She wasn't here for them. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to prove something to herself. Her father had always told her that if she could endure the mockery, the sneers, and the doubts, she would eventually rise above it all. She had spent years building her resilience, facing the world's judgment without flinching, without losing her focus. Today would be no different. With a deep breath, she lifted the rifle to her shoulder. The weight of it was awkward, she had never handled a weapon like this before. The slick surface of the barrel felt cold against her skin, the recoil anticipated, her body slightly tense in preparation. But she knew that if she let the fear in, she would lose. She focused on the target ahead, the small black circle at the center of the paper seeming to grow larger and larger in her vision. The world outside the target faded, the voices, the mocking laughter, all of it disappeared. She had trained for this moment. Not at shooting ranges, but in her own way, in her own life. The battles she had fought, the challenges she had overcome, the odds that had always been stacked against her. This was just another test, another mountain to climb. And she would conquer it. Her breath steadied. The rifle felt more natural in her hands now, her fingers finding their grip, her body shifting to accommodate the weapon's weight. It wasn't about precision in the beginning, it was about control. About proving she could handle what was thrown at her, no matter how hard it seemed. The shot rang out. The sharp sound of the bullet tearing through the air was followed by the faint whistle as it embedded itself into the target. It wasn't a bullseye, but it was close. The laughter stopped. For a brief second, there was nothing but silence. She lowered the rifle, her hand still steady, her gaze fixed on the target. The group of shooters behind her stood frozen, staring at the hole in the paper, a hole that had been made by a woman who was supposed to fail. It wasn't a perfect shot, but it was enough. Enough to show them that she was no joke. She turned her head slightly, catching the eyes of the billionaire who had bet against her. He had been laughing, too, not in any real way of malice, but more out of sheer disbelief that she could be standing in this space, let alone attempting to shoot. His face was unreadable now, his smugness replaced by something akin to curiosity. But the smirk didn't vanish. He wasn't worried yet. One shot wasn't enough to prove anything. It was still just a fluke. But she wasn't done. She picked up the rifle again, checking her stance and aligning her breath. This time, she felt the eyes on her more acutely. The crowd had shifted, whispers had started again, this time of a different tone. "Maybe she's not as bad as we thought," one of them murmured. But still, there was skepticism in the air. Her next shot came, quicker, more sure. This time, the bullet hit dead center. A perfect strike. The audience gasped. Her hand was steady now, a calm that had descended over her like a wave. She shot again, and again. Each time, the bullet hit its mark with frightening accuracy. The sound of the shots was like music now, sharp, punctuated, steady. The billionaire stood there, his arms crossed, his expression shifting from disbelief to something closer to respect, but still masked in arrogance. It was the kind of respect one might give to a competitor who's showing some skill, but not yet enough to earn admiration. Shot after shot, the target continued to fall apart. The other shooters remained silent now, some beginning to lower their weapons in respect, others looking on in stunned disbelief. But the real moment came when she fired her 10th shot. The sound of the rifle echoed through the range, and the bullet hit dead center of the target, creating a perfect hole in the paper. There was nothing left of the black bullseye, just a clean, flawless shot. The crowd was silent. Not a single voice. Not a single movement. Just the faint hum of the ventilation system, and the heavy air of shock that had settled over everyone. The billionaire who had mocked her stood there, his face pale. His jaw was tight, his eyes wide with disbelief. The smirk was gone. The bet was forgotten. She had proven herself, and there was no denying it. She lowered the rifle and turned to walk away, her movements deliberate, controlled. She didn't need to say anything. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could. As she walked toward the exit, she overheard the billionaire whisper to his companion. "I've never seen anything like that before. 10 shots. Perfect. Who is she?" The words hung in the air, unanswered. She didn't need to be anyone. She didn't need to prove anything to them. She had proven everything to herself. And that, she thought, was enough. The shooting range was still echoing with the reverberation of the last shot. The once boisterous group of shooters had turned into a group of statues, their faces frozen in disbelief. She had just done the impossible. 10 perfect shots. No flukes. No mistakes. Every shot had been precise, each one cutting through the silence like a blade. But it wasn't just the accuracy that had them stunned. It was the sheer audacity of it. A woman, untrained, mocked, underestimated, had walked into their world and blown them all away. She didn't care about the shock on their faces, though. It wasn't about them. It was about something else. Something far deeper. She had come here with one mission, to prove to herself that she could. Not to win anyone's respect, not to be their favorite, but to prove that the doubters were wrong, that they had underestimated her, and more importantly, that she wasn't invisible. As she turned and made her way toward the exit, she could still hear the whispers behind her. Some were in awe, others in disbelief, and still, there were a few who whispered in hushed tones of how they had underestimated her, how they had thought it was a fluke. She wasn't done. She didn't need to be. The look on their faces was enough. But as she stepped outside into the warm, bright sunlight, her phone buzzed. She reached for it, not surprised to see that it was a message from her best friend, Mia. She had told Mia she was going to the range that day, but Mia knew nothing about the events that had just transpired. The text read, "You okay? I heard about the shooting event. Everyone's talking about you." She smiled, a small, satisfied grin tugging at her lips. She quickly typed a reply, "All good. Just finished. I did it." She could almost picture Mia's face lighting up in excitement on the other side of the phone. But as she hit send, a shadow fell over her. The billionaire from the shooting range had followed her out. He was now standing just a few feet away, watching her intently, as if he was trying to read her. She hadn't expected him to come after her. She had assumed he would retreat into the background like so many others had when she had walked away from the range. But this one was different. He wasn't done with her yet. "Impressive," he said, his voice low, almost as if trying to test her reaction. "I didn't expect that." She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just stared at him for a long moment. His tailored suit, his confident demeanor, and the arrogance that seemed to cling to him like a second skin, it all screamed wealth, power, and privilege. He was used to getting what he wanted, used to controlling situations, used to having the world bend to his will. But here she was, standing before him, a person who had done what no one else thought was possible. "Thank you," she said simply. She didn't need to say more. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words could. He studied her for a few more seconds, his lips curling into a small smile. "I want to make a deal," he said, his eyes scanning her face, looking for something. "I think you're capable of more than you let on. I think you've got more to prove. And I want to offer you a challenge." Her heart raced. She didn't know whether she should be flattered or concerned. She had expected to walk away from the day, to move on, but this billionaire was persistent. Too persistent. "A challenge?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, her curiosity piqued. She didn't trust him, not entirely, but she had to admit that there was something intriguing about him. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, like he wasn't seeing her as a woman, or even as a competitor. He was seeing her as a puzzle, something that needed to be solved. And that intrigued her. He nodded, his eyes glinting. "You've got skill, no question. But you've got more potential than that. I can see it in you. What if I told you there's a way for you to make some real money doing this? Not just winning competitions, but becoming something bigger. Something no one thought you could ever be." She blinked, unsure of what he was saying. Money? She didn't need money. Or at least, she didn't think she did. But the way he spoke, with such certainty, with such confidence, it made her wonder what kind of game he was playing. "What kind of money?" she asked, her voice cautious but curious. The billionaire took a step closer. "I'm not talking about a small payout, not some local competition. I'm talking about real stakes. High-profile events. The kind where the big players come together and put their egos on the line. The kind where winning isn't just about skill, it's about strategy, about pushing yourself beyond what you think is possible. And I think you could be one of the best." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm willing to sponsor you. Give you the training, the resources, everything you need to compete at the highest level. In return, I want you to enter a private competition, something exclusive. If you win, the prize is yours. The kind of money that can change your life forever." She had heard of high-stakes competitions before, the ones where people risk everything for a chance to prove their worth and walk away with a life-changing sum of money. But they were dangerous. And not just in terms of the competition. They had a way of bringing out the worst in people, of forcing them to betray their values for the sake of victory. She wasn't sure if she wanted to get involved in something like that. But then she thought about the life she had built, the struggles she had endured. She had spent so much of her life fighting to be seen, to be heard. This was her chance to finally show the world what she was capable of. Not just the people at the range, but the world. "You're asking me to risk everything for what?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. The billionaire's eyes gleamed. "For your freedom. For a chance to live life on your terms. For a chance to prove to everyone who ever doubted you that they were wrong." His words lingered in the air, and for a moment, she was silent, contemplating everything he was offering. The risk. The reward. The challenge. But then, as quickly as the doubt had crept in, it vanished. She wasn't the kind of person to back down from a challenge. She wasn't the kind of person who would let fear hold her back. Not anymore. "All right," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I'm in." The billionaire smiled, his expression one of satisfaction. "I knew you would be." He handed her a business card. "This is my number. When you're ready, call me. I'll arrange everything. But be prepared. This isn't going to be easy. It's going to take everything you've got." She nodded, her mind already racing with the possibilities. This was it. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. As the billionaire turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the parking lot with the card in her hand, she felt a strange sense of excitement and fear. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that could change everything. But little did she know, the road ahead would be far more treacherous than she could ever imagine. The competition was just the beginning. And the challenges that awaited her would test everything she had, her skills, her resilience, and her very soul. The days after her encounter with the billionaire were a blur. The invitation had been extended. The offer was real. And the competition, as she had learned, was nothing like she had imagined. There were no flashy advertisements, no media buzz, no signs that this kind of high-stakes world even existed. Instead, it was shrouded in secrecy. Invitations to a private club of sorts, hidden from the world. A place where the wealthy, powerful, and influential gathered to test their skills against one another, not just in shooting, but in a range of challenges that went far beyond what most people could fathom. She didn't know what she was getting herself into. But the feeling that burned within her was undeniable. This was her moment. This was the opportunity to prove herself on her terms. A few days after receiving the billionaire's card, she called the number he had given her. It rang twice before he answered, his voice as smooth and confident as it had been the first time they spoke. "You ready?" he asked, as if it was the only question that mattered. She took a deep breath. "I'm ready." He gave a short laugh, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. I'll have someone pick you up in 2 hours. Wear something comfortable." The line clicked, and she stood there, staring at her phone, the weight of her decision sinking in. Comfortable? What did that even mean in this world? She couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her, but the excitement soon outweighed it. She had come this far. Now, she had to take the leap. 2 hours later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of her apartment building. The driver didn't speak much, simply nodding when she got in. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face stoic, his demeanor professional. The city passed by in a blur as the car moved smoothly through the streets, heading toward a part of town she had never been before. She wasn't sure where they were going. There was no address to speak of, just vague directions that led her deeper into the heart of the city's industrial district. Eventually, the car slowed and stopped in front of an unmarked door. No signs. No fancy lights. Just a cold, concrete building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. But as soon as she stepped out, the door opened on its own, and a man in a sharp black suit greeted her. "Welcome," he said, his voice clipped, efficient. "We've been expecting you." Her stomach flipped as she stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, sealing her in with no way of turning back. The interior was the complete opposite of the exterior, modern, sleek, and filled with an aura of power that made her feel small, insignificant. There was a long hallway leading to a grandiose room, the floors polished to a high sheen, the walls adorned with abstract art and minimalist design. She followed the man down the hallway, her footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The further they went, the more she could feel the tension building in her chest. What had she gotten herself into? Was this just another game for the billionaires to play, or was this something far more dangerous? When they reached the end of the hallway, the man opened a large door. Inside, a group of people sat in a circle, their attention fixed on a large table in the center of the room. There were no windows, no distractions, just the cold, sterile air of the space. And the people. She recognized some of them. The billionaire from the shooting range was there, sitting confidently at the head of the table. A few others were in the room as well, wealthy men and women in expensive suits, their expressions unreadable. Some had the air of being far too comfortable in this world, while others seemed a little more tense, unsure of what was to come. But the most unsettling thing of all was the quiet. No one spoke. No one greeted her. She felt like an intruder, and yet, she was the one they had brought here. "Take a seat," the billionaire's voice broke through the stillness, pulling her attention back to him. He nodded toward an empty chair beside him. "We've been waiting." She hesitated for a moment, but the weight of his gaze pushed her to move. She sat down, her hands folding in her lap. "Now that you're here," he continued, his voice carrying a quiet authority, "let me explain the rules. This is not a typical competition. You'll be tested in ways you never expected. You'll face challenges that will push you to your limits, physically, mentally, and emotionally." Her heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air like a warning, but she didn't flinch. This was what she had signed up for. "There are no second chances," the billionaire added. "You either rise to the challenge, or you fail. And if you fail," he let the sentence hang in the air for a moment, his eyes locking onto hers. "There are consequences." The room was silent. The tension was palpable, each person in the circle looking at her, evaluating her. She could feel their eyes on her like knives. She was out of her element, surrounded by people who had more power, more wealth, and more experience than she could ever hope to match. But this was her shot. This was her moment to prove that she belonged. She nodded. "I'm ready." The billionaire's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Good. Let's begin." A man in a black suit, standing to the side, stepped forward and handed her a piece of paper. She looked down at it. It was a list of challenges, some she could understand, others not so much. Each one more difficult than the last. "You'll have to complete each challenge in a set amount of time. If you succeed, you move to the next. Fail, and you're out." Simple as that, the billionaire said, his voice cutting through the thick air. The first challenge was simple enough, a shooting test, the kind she was used to. The difference here was that the stakes were higher. The room was silent as the challenge began, her heartbeat quickening with every passing second. Her first shot hit the target dead center, and the room was still. She could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't let it distract her. She was focused. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. But the challenges only became harder. Each task pushed her to the edge, physically and mentally. The second test involved hand-to-hand combat, a fight against a trained fighter who had been sent to challenge her skills. She wasn't prepared for the force of it, the pain that shot through her body with each hit, but she fought back, using every ounce of strength she had left. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't graceful. But it was enough. By the time the third challenge rolled around, she was exhausted. The tension, the physical exertion, and the constant evaluation were beginning to wear her down. But she knew this was just the beginning. There was more at stake here than just her pride. There was something far bigger at play, something she wasn't yet ready to understand. The final test of the day was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't about physical strength or skill. It was about deception, mind games. She had to outsmart the group, manipulate the situation to her advantage, and outthink the billionaire and his associates. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. This wasn't just a competition. It was a game of power, of control. And as she stared around the room, she realized she was just another pawn in their game. But she wasn't about to let them win. Not now. Not after everything she had sacrificed to get here. The days blurred into one another as the competition continued. Each challenge seemed to grow in intensity, testing her limits in ways she had never imagined. It wasn't just about skill anymore. It was about survival. The billionaire had made it clear from the beginning that there would be no second chances. Fail, and you were out. And the consequences of failure were more than just embarrassment. The prize for success was too great to think about anything other than winning. By the time the fourth day arrived, she had barely slept. Her body was sore from the physical exertion of the previous days, her mind running on fumes. Every challenge had stretched her further than she had thought possible, both mentally and emotionally. The hand-to-hand combat had been the hardest, but the mental game was proving to be the most taxing. She had learned quickly that this wasn't just a test of her physical ability. It was a test of her resilience, of her ability to think on her feet, to outsmart and outmaneuver everyone around her. The billionaire and his associates weren't just watching her, they were studying her, calculating her every move. It was a game of chess, and she was the pawn being moved across the board. But she was determined. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to stop now. Not when the prize was within reach. Not when she had spent her entire life fighting to be seen, to be recognized. This was her shot. The billionaire had told her from the start that she would need to be prepared for anything. And now, she was beginning to understand what he meant. The next challenge was unlike anything she had faced before. It began in the same cold, sterile room, with the same group of people seated around the table. Their faces were unreadable as always, but there was something in the air tonight, something that felt different. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The billionaire stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on the polished surface in front of him. "Tonight," he began, his voice low and steady, "you will face your biggest challenge yet." She felt a chill run down her spine, the words hanging in the air. "What kind of challenge?" she asked, her voice steady despite the apprehension bubbling inside her. The billionaire's smile was cold, calculating. "Tonight, you'll be tested in a way you can't anticipate. This is where the true competition begins. The stakes are higher now, and the price of failure, well, you'll find out soon enough." He motioned to one of the men in the room, who stood and walked to the back of the room. A door slid open, revealing a large, darkened space beyond. It was a room she hadn't seen before, one that was hidden behind a thick curtain of secrecy. A shiver ran down her spine as she followed the man's gaze. "Come with me," the billionaire ordered. Without a word, she followed him through the darkened hallway, her footsteps echoing against the concrete floors. The silence between them was suffocating. She had no idea what awaited her, but she could feel the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest. When they reached the end of the hallway, the man opened a heavy door, revealing a large, dimly lit space. The floor was made of cold, polished stone, and the walls were adorned with dark tapestries that seemed to swallow the light. It was an intimidating room. One that made her feel small, insignificant. The billionaire entered behind her, closing the door softly behind them. "This is where it all begins," he said, his voice echoing in the space. She stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the room. There was something strange about it, something unsettling. The walls seemed to close in around her, the shadows stretching long and thin in the corners. But in the center of the room stood a pedestal, illuminated by a single spotlight. On the pedestal lay a large, intricately carved box. It was old, worn, its edges frayed as if it had been passed down through generations. The wood was dark and polished, the carving so intricate that they seemed to move in the low light. She didn't understand. What was the significance of this box? The billionaire motioned for her to approach it. "Open it," he said, his voice stern. With trembling hands, she stepped forward and lifted the lid of the box. Inside was a small, delicate scroll, its edges frayed and ancient-looking. She felt a strange sense of foreboding. As she reached for it, unfurling the scroll carefully in her hands. On the scroll was a message, written in a script she didn't recognize. The symbols danced across the paper, their meaning completely foreign to her. But as she stared at the symbols, something in her gut twisted, a feeling that told her this wasn't just a random challenge. This was something bigger, something more dangerous. She looked up at the billionaire. "What is this?" He stepped forward, his eyes glinting in the low light. "This is the key to your next challenge. A challenge that will test not just your strength, but your ability to decode and understand what's before you. You'll have to figure it out. Solve the puzzle." Her heart raced as she looked at the cryptic symbols. She was no expert in ancient languages or puzzles, but she could feel the weight of the task ahead of her. It wasn't just a test of intellect, it was a test of survival. "What happens if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The billionaire's smile deepened, his eyes dark with amusement. "Then you'll never leave this room. There are consequences for failure, as I've already told you. It's not just about winning anymore. It's about understanding the true nature of this game." She swallowed hard, her mind racing. This wasn't just a game, it was a power struggle. And she was at the center of it. The billionaire turned and walked toward the door. "You have 1 hour," he said over his shoulder. "Fail, and you'll regret it." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving her alone in the dark, silent room. The scroll in her hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than ever before, that something far greater than money was at play. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. This was no longer about proving herself. This was no longer about the competition. This was about survival. The real challenge had begun. She examined the scroll again, running her fingers over the delicate paper. The symbols seemed to shimmer in the dim light, as if they were alive. She had no idea what they meant, but one thing was certain, she had to figure it out. She had to unlock the mystery before time ran out. The clock was ticking. And failure wasn't an option. The hour seemed to drag on for what felt like an eternity. The ancient scroll in her hands, its cryptic symbols mocking her with their alien intricacies, felt heavier with every passing second. She had no idea what they meant, but she could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on her. The billionaire had made it clear, fail, and there would be consequences, consequences that were not just physical, but psychological, threatening to break her down in ways she had never imagined. The cold stone walls of the room closed in on her as she paced back and forth, running her fingers over the symbols again, hoping to unlock some hidden meaning, some clue that would give her the answer she needed. But it was futile. The more she studied it, the more confused she became. Each symbol seemed to shift and change, as if mocking her, taunting her with its elusiveness. Her breathing grew shallow as panic crept in. She wasn't used to this. She had always been in control. Always. But now, she was completely at the mercy of this game, of the billionaire's twisted challenge. Every step she had taken, every challenge she had conquered, had led her to this moment. And now, the final test was here. The minutes ticked by, and the weight of time pressed on her chest like a suffocating hand. She glanced at the door, half expecting someone to walk in and announce that she had failed. But no one came. The room was silent, save for the sound of her own racing thoughts. She couldn't give up. She wouldn't. The symbols, they had to mean something. She focused again, trying to push aside her fear, trying to block out the growing sense of desperation. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to win, she needed to think clearly. She started to notice something. The symbols weren't just random, they were patterns. Patterns she had seen before, buried deep within her mind. It was like a puzzle, a riddle, a code. She had trained herself to think under pressure before, but this was different. This wasn't a shooting challenge or a physical test, it was a test of her intellect. And it wasn't just about winning. It was about understanding the depths of the game she had entered. Her eyes flicked back to the scroll, focusing on the symbols in a way she hadn't before. Slowly, the pieces started to fall into place. The patterns became clearer. They were aligned with something she had seen in a book once, something she had learned as a child. It was an ancient cipher. A system of symbols that could be decoded if you knew the key. Her heart pounded as the realization hit her. She wasn't just supposed to decipher the symbols themselves. She needed to understand the context, the history behind them. This challenge wasn't just about brute force, it was about knowledge. It was about wisdom, about understanding things that most people would have ignored. She scanned the scroll again, her fingers trembling as she traced the symbols. Her mind raced as she pieced together the clues, connecting the symbols to ancient texts, to forgotten languages, to puzzles she had studied in the past. Each step was a revelation, each symbol unlocking a deeper layer of meaning. The clock ticked louder in her mind, the pressure building as the seconds slipped away. She had to act fast. She had no idea what would happen if she didn't finish in time, but she wasn't about to find out. Finally, it clicked. She had deciphered the code. The message was simple, but chilling. To win, you must give everything. The game will test your limits. The final decision is yours. The word sent a shiver through her. Everything. The final decision was hers. She could feel the weight of those words sinking in, the enormity of what they meant. This wasn't just about surviving the challenges. It was about something far darker. Something more sinister. The game, the billionaire's world, it was a trap. She wasn't just playing for a prize anymore. She was playing for her life. She stood there, holding the scroll in her hand, her mind spinning. The final test was coming, and she wasn't ready for it. She had survived the other challenges, but this was different. This was personal. Suddenly, the door to the room creaked open, and the billionaire stepped in, his face unreadable. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching her, waiting for her to react. "Have you solved it?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, though her throat felt dry. "I've decoded it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I don't understand. What's the final test?" The billionaire's lips curled into a smile, but there was something cold in his eyes. The final test is not one you can prepare for. It's not about intellect or skill. It's about choice. He stepped closer, his presence looming over her. "You've made it this far, but now you must decide. What are you willing to sacrifice to win? Are you willing to give up everything? Your integrity, your soul, your humanity?" Her breath caught in her throat as his words hit her like a punch. The billionaire wasn't just testing her physical limits anymore. He was testing her morality, her very essence. This wasn't just a game. It was a test of who she was as a person. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. The billionaire smiled again, but this time it was different. It was almost pitying. "I told you. This is about power. And power comes with a price. You can win the game, but you must make the ultimate choice. You either give up everything to claim victory, or you walk away and lose everything. He stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers. The choice is yours. Her mind spun. What did he mean? What was the price of power? She had come so far, endured so much. She wasn't going to walk away now. But what was the cost? She glanced at the scroll in her hands. The message had said, "Give everything." What did that mean? Was it a metaphor? Or was it something more literal? The billionaire's voice cut through her thoughts. You must decide. The game ends now. If you choose to win, you will gain everything. But in return, you will lose something far more precious. A sudden sense of clarity washed over her. This wasn't about skill or intellect. It was about the choices she made, about the values she held dear. The billionaire had been testing her all along, not just to see if she could win, but to see what she was willing to sacrifice to get there. The decision was hers, and hers alone. But whatever she chose, it would change her life forever. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The final test had arrived. She couldn't back down now. She wasn't the kind of person who ran from challenges. But this one was different. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice steady, but a storm raged inside her. The billionaire's smile grew wider. I want you to choose, and I want you to do it quickly. Time is running out. The air in the room felt heavier than ever. Her pulse hammered in her chest, echoing in her ears, drowning out all other sounds. The billionaire's words reverberated through her mind, replaying over and over again like a broken record. You must decide. The game ends now. If you choose to win, you will gain everything. But in return, you will lose something far more precious. What did that mean? What was the cost of winning? Her fingers tightened around the ancient scroll, the symbols now burned into her memory. She had decoded the message, understood its implications, but nothing had prepared her for this. There was no guidebook to tell her what to do next. There was no one to turn to for advice. This was her battle, her choice, and no one could help her. The billionaire stood there, watching her, his gaze piercing, waiting. His presence seemed to fill the entire room, like the walls were closing in around her. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had set this up from the very beginning. Every challenge, every test had led to this moment. The power to decide was in her hands, but the price was still unclear. She had thought the challenges were the hardest part. She had faced the physical tests, the mental games, and the manipulation. But this? This was something else entirely. This was about more than survival. It was about her very soul. What do you mean by everything? She finally asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. The billionaire took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. I mean your life, your relationships, your integrity, everything that defines you. If you want to win this game, you must be willing to give up the things that make you who you are. It's about power. Power over yourself and over others. The ultimate victory comes at a cost. He paused, his lips curling into a cold smile. But you don't have to do this. You can walk away. You can leave and live the life you've always known. The life you've fought so hard to protect. But if you choose to walk away now, you will lose everything you've gained. You will never know what could have been. She stared at him, her mind racing. The decision before her was unimaginable. How could she choose? How could she give up everything she had worked so hard for? Why are you doing this? She asked, almost breathless. Why make us go through all of this? The games, the tests, what's the point? The billionaire's eyes glittered in the dim light. The point? The point is simple. I have spent my entire life building this empire, this world of power and control. I've built it on the backs of those who thought they could play by the rules. But the truth is, there are no rules. There are only winners and losers. And the true winners are those who are willing to pay the price for victory. He stepped back, his eyes locking onto hers. I've given you the opportunity to join the ranks of the elite. To become one of the few who truly understands the nature of power. But only if you're willing to sacrifice everything that stands in your way. She took a step back, her heart pounding. It wasn't just a game, it was a test of her character. And that terrified her. She had fought for so long to be seen, to be heard, to make her mark on the world. But now, the question wasn't about her survival. It was about what kind of person she wanted to be. Was she willing to trade her integrity for power? Was she ready to give up everything she had fought for just to claim victory in a game that had no clear rules? Her mind raced through the possibilities. If she won, she could have everything she had ever dreamed of: wealth, status, influence. The power to shape the world around her. But at what cost? The billionaire had said it plainly, she would lose something precious. What was she willing to sacrifice? Was her soul worth the price of power? Was she willing to become just another pawn in his twisted game? Her breath hitched as the weight of the decision bore down on her. She had been pushed to the brink before, physically, mentally, emotionally. But this was different. This was the moment that would define her life forever. Her eyes flicked to the scroll in her hands. The symbols, once a riddle, were now a symbol of everything she had learned. Everything she had fought for. She had always prided herself on being able to endure, to push through the pain, the doubts, the mockery. She had always believed that if she could survive the challenges, she could conquer anything. But now, she was faced with the ultimate test. Not of strength or intelligence, but of who she was as a person. What kind of person would she be when this was all over? The billionaire's voice broke through her thoughts again. You've made it this far, but now you must choose. Power or integrity? Victory or defeat? Walk away, or claim the world as your own. He was right. This was her choice. And yet, it felt as if the decision was already made for her. She had come so far, fought so hard. What was the point of turning back now? She turned away from him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. What was she willing to sacrifice? What would she lose if she gave in? And what would she gain? The answer came to her with shocking clarity. She didn't need to play by their rules. She didn't need to follow their path. She didn't need their approval. She could choose a different way. A way that didn't involve selling her soul for power. A way that would keep her integrity intact, no matter the cost. She turned back to face the billionaire, her decision final. I choose to walk away, she said, her voice unwavering. I won't play this game anymore. The billionaire's smile faltered for a moment, then returned, but it was different now. You've made your choice, he said, his tone colder than before. But don't think this will be easy. You can walk away, but the consequences are not as simple as you think. I'm willing to face them, she replied, her voice steady. Because I'd rather lose everything than lose myself. The billionaire didn't say anything for a moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As the door slammed shut behind him, she stood there, alone in the dimly lit room. The tension, the fear, the weight of the game, it was all gone. She had chosen herself, and that was the only victory that mattered. The world outside was waiting for her. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt free. Free from the manipulation, free from the games, and free to live her life on her terms. And as she stepped toward the door, she knew that no matter what came next, she had made the right choice. She was no longer a pawn. She was the one in control of her fate.